Hello and welcome to Aviation This Week on Channels Television. I'm Bukola Joe Oketumbi. PCR COVID-19 test results, repeat test in country, a 7-day quarantine are part of the requirements for international passengers as Nigeria opens its air borders. With restrictions on Nigeria from several countries, the federal government says flights will be allowed in based on reciprocity. How this reciprocity will pan out is our interest. Plus, the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority warns pilots over weather hazards. Our background report is next, and we start with the basis of reciprocity, which is the Bilateral Air Services Agreement.
Bilateral air service agreements are treaties signed between countries to allow international commercial air transport services between them. These agreements provide the framework under which identified airlines from the two countries fly into designated ports in each other's country. The bilateral system has its basis under the Chicago Convention and associated multilateral treaties.
Actually, the principle of BASA is based on reciprocity. And this is one area that everybody who is involved in BASA negotiation must pay attention to. What is BASA agreement in terms of reciprocity? If you want to come into my country, I give you 2 slots. If I want to come into your country, you give me 2 slots. That is reciprocity. Every region, they have their own standards. American standard is there, the European standard is there. Their own standard could be the type of aircraft you need to use, how many aircraft you have in your fleet before you start operations.
BASAs are negotiated based on 9 freedoms of the air, which include the privilege to fly across a state's territory without landing, the privilege to land for non-traffic purposes, for example, for refueling, repairs, and maintenance, the privilege of an airline from one country to carry traffic from its own country to another country, the privilege of an airline from one country to carry traffic from another country to its own country, and the privilege of an airline from one country to carry traffic between 2 other countries, providing that the flight originates and terminates in its own country. As of 2016, Nigeria retained its attractiveness with 90 of these agreements, although most remain lopsided. Some operators are quick to add that the approval for some carriers to fly into several airports limits the growth of the domestic sector.
I don't want a situation where you give them 7, 9, 20. It doesn't help the economy of the Nigerian domestic carrier. It doesn't help. Because a country where we have multiple destination airport, the total we have in this country is about 20-something airports. Viable airport, maybe 7. Maybe. Actual airport that we know we can manage is 3 or 4.
The big airlines we have today were encouraged by their government, they were sponsored or financed by their government, and they are in what the state they are today because they had the government backings. They had the backings from the states. Here, if we expect Nigerian airlines to grow, you must protect the market, Nigerian market. If you expect the airlines in Nigeria to grow, you must encourage them and give them what it takes.
One of the most popular routes under the BASA agreement is the Lagos-London route. Nigeria Airways, Virgin Nigeria, Arik Air, and Medview are carriers who made incursions. The last did complain of aeropolitics in the form of a third carrier operator certification.
767 300 ER. That's the aircraft. Beautifully done, brought in for the business, and it was going very well. But unfortunately, they introduced what we call TCO, third country operator. There was no basis for them to introduce TCO because the country to country, we are both signed an agreement. How are you going there when there is IATA, where there is IOSA, when there is ICAO? Everything is already established. Why the TCO? So the whole exercise, like I said to you, is like a game.
While many countries across the world still maintain these agreements, the COVID-19 pandemic appears to be changing the status quo, as countries in Europe this August began to place restrictions again to curb the spike in COVID-19 numbers. In Rome, queues of people in testing centers across the capital, of people returning from Croatia, Greece, Spain and Malta, now obliged to undergo testing on their return to Italy. The government imposed screening from the 4 countries, but some airports are still not up and running with the screening capabilities on site. Britain is currently investigating using coronavirus testing to shorten quarantine times for travelers from restricted countries, but does not want to offer false hopes.
As you'll recall, we review the system of quarantine, so the rules behind it, if you like, every month. So we're carrying on doing that, and we're reviewing this as part of the process. But we'll say more when we've got a system that could actually work. What I don't want to do is raise false expectations that there's some sort of scientific sort of approach that prevents all quarantine. Either you're going to have to quarantine before you leave to travel somewhere, and have tests, or you're going to have to quarantine and have tests afterwards. There isn't, as is sometimes presented, the option of a simple test on arrival, then you're free to go, because for the reasons explained, it won't catch a sufficient number of people who actually have coronavirus at that moment but don't know it themselves.
While countries like the UK and Italy battle hard to ensure that aviation is not the vector spreading the COVID-19 and restrictions still in place, some of the travel restrictions are hitting hard at Nigeria. In the face of this, Nigeria's airspace is expected to welcome international flights on August the 29th, but the federal government says countries that have banned Nigeria will not be allowed in.
The principle of reciprocity will be applied. The conditions you give Nigerians to travel to your country will apply the same thing. If you ban us from coming to your country, the same will apply the other way. It's just to get a level playing field on the issue of the reciprocity.
An aviation analyst is not optimistic this will be implemented.
Perhaps only Arica in the past few years and Air Peace lately that has struggled very hard to service our buses. And these airlines, as you know, they have their own issues as well that they're struggling with. However, if you put that on the side now, and you put it, you now look at the issues of nationalities, except you want to tell me, or anybody wants to tell us that Nigerians will not be allowed into Germany, Nigerians will not be allowed into the United States, or they will not be allowed into the UK. That is when this reciprocity factor will matter. Because if you say Nigerians can't come into the UK, then we can tell the UK that we will not allow British citizens into Nigeria. And same thing will be applicable to other countries. However, if it's about airlines, British Airways will fly here, Virgin Atlantic will fly here. How many airlines do we have in Nigeria that can really reciprocate?
The Lagos and Abuja International Airports are expected to receive 4 flights, each with 1,280 passengers for a start.
The National Coordinator of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, Mr. Sani Aliyu, at a recent briefing, spells out what is expected of incoming travelers into Nigeria.
We will be continuing with the process of requesting for a negative PCR result for all passengers boarding to travel to Nigeria. These COVID tests must be PCR tests. We will not accept serological results. We are concerned about the quality of some of the results and the discrepancy we are getting when passengers are subsequently tested in country. For this reason, the protocol that has just been approved will be reviewed after 4 weeks, and we will also be looking at the level of discrepancy between negative and positive results with a view to developing a list of accredited laboratories for countries that we frequently receive travelers from. In that regard, once we have a list of accredited laboratories working through the different embassies, we will insist that passengers use these laboratories for the tests. All intending travelers to Nigeria must have tested negative for COVID-19 PCR before allowed entry into the country. We are narrowing the period of validity for the PCR test from the current 14 days to 7 days from the 29th of August. Preferably, the PCR test should be done as close as possible to the point of departure for Nigeria, preferably within 48 to 72 hours, but we will still accept results that are valid within 7 days. Prior to boarding, we are currently developing a payment portal, as you are aware. At the moment, for all evacuation flights, the PCR tests that we do in country have been sponsored by the Aliko Dangote Foundation. We are very grateful for their generosity. We have had more than 13,000 Nigerians, stranded Nigerians, brought into the country as a result of this process. But from the 29th of August, travelers will be required to pay for their COVID-19 test in country. We are developing a national payment portal, which will link to the current Lagos payment portal that is already active for passengers. And we will allow validated, accredited private laboratories in the country to provide these services. We are currently working on switching the health declaration or self-reporting form that is currently being filled manually to an electronic format. And passengers will be asked to fill this form immediately before boarding so that the electronic version can be submitted and they can be cleared quickly when they arrive. We will continue with the policy of ensuring that airlines only board passengers without symptoms of COVID and with negative PCR results. Airlines will be fined $3,500 per passenger if they fail to comply with pre-boarding COVID requirements. On arrival in country, from the 29th of August, passports will no longer be retained by the Nigeria Immigration Service. Rather, passengers will be allowed to proceed and exit the airport once they can show evidence of a negative COVID PCR result, evidence of payment for a repeat PCR result in country, and where possible and where we have been able to sort this health questionnaire form that has been submitted either manually or electronically. Passengers will be asked to proceed on self-isolation at home for a period of 7 days. On day 7, they will proceed to their sample collection center or laboratory, private laboratory, for a repeat COVID PCR test. By day 8, if the PCR test is negative, they will be allowed to exit isolation.
When Aviation This Week returns, the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority issues weather advisory to pilots. That's a news flash. Do join us again. The Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority has issued a weather advisory to the industry and demands strict compliance. The objective of the advisory is to bring pilots and operators up to date on the occurrence of thunderstorm phenomenon over Nigerian airports since the onset of the rainy season. The advisory states that air traffic controllers may temporarily close airspace when hazardous weather conditions such as severe thunderstorms, squall lines, microburst or low-level wind shear are observed or forecast by NIMET. Pilots are also asked to exercise maximum restraint whenever adverse weather is observed or forecast by NIMET. Job losses to the tune of 3.5 million people is what is expected in Africa's aviation market. Here at home, airlines and aviation companies have evolved strategies to keep jobs. Dana Airlines says its staff are rotating a 2-week work roster to avoid job cuts.
We have also reviewed it, considering the fact that people have we've had 3 months of lockdown, and to avoid, extending the situation to staff, we've decided to kind of rotate staff to ensure that instead of downsizing, outright downsizing, no, we did not do that at Dana Air. We decided to rotate, and nobody has been asked to go home at the moment.
Aviation unions say they are warming up for a nationwide protest against the airport concession program of the federal government. While the federal government insists that the scheme is irreversible on account of its lean purse to efficiently manage the gateways, the unions insist giving away the critical facilities to profit-driven private investors was not in the best interest of Nigerians.
We expected that the Ministry of Aviation or federal government will face the national carrier first, not the issue of concession. What do we want to concession? The place they are now measuring, they are far, 100 years above us. Without the answer to this, that is why we have explained it to NLC and TUC. It has been a national issue, national concern, and they have taken it up.
Virgin Atlantic's creditors are expected to vote on a £1.2 billion rescue plan in a crucial test of the airline's ability to survive in an industry devastated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Virgin Atlantic agreed to the deal with shareholders and creditors in July to secure its future beyond the coronavirus crisis. The airline, which is 51% owned by Richard Branson's Virgin Group and 49% by U.S. airline Delta, said it remains confident in the restructuring plan and is on track to finalize its solvent recapitalization in the first week of September. About $320 billion has been lost in global tourism in the last 5 months of this year. That's what the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has explained. Mr. Guterres in the video address said that the United Nations has come up with a policy brief to address challenges facing the sector.
Tourism is itself one of the wonders of the world. That is why it has been so painful to see how tourism has been devastated by the COVID-19 pandemic. In the first 5 months of this year, international tourist arrivals decreased by more than half, and some $320 billion in exports from tourism were lost. Overall, some 120 million direct jobs in tourism are at risk. Many are in the informal economy or in micro, small and medium-sized enterprises which employ a high proportion of women and young people. The crisis is a major shock for developed economies.
Soaking in your destination without ever leaving Tokyo is what Japanese businessman Katsuo Inoue did for this year's summer vacation. Inoue said he enjoyed the trimmings of a first-class cabin and the sights of Florence and Rome. 56-year-old Inoue and his wife flew as clients of Tokyo entertainment company First Airlines, which is tapping into a growing virtual reality travel market for Japanese holiday makers grounded by coronavirus travel restrictions.
安全面があるじゃないですか。行ってないから。行ってないけど行った気になるんで、僕は好きですね。
海外には仕事でよく行くんですけど、 イタリアは初めてで、それをバーチャル的に見ただけで結構ですね、あ、こういったものがあるんだという実態ができたっていう感じで、いいなというのは印象に残ってますね。
Grounded travelers sit in first-class seats in a mock jetliner cabin where they are served in-flight meals and drinks with aircraft exterior views of passing clouds and the plane taking off, projected on the side for a simulated experience. Virtual reality goggles provide further immersive tours at destinations including as well as Italy's cities of culture Paris, New York, Rome and Hawaii.
では同じ時代の別の建築も見てみましょう。一体教会という意味の名を持ち
At First Airlines, where passengers are given a pre-flight safety demonstration with a life vest and oxygen mask, bookings were up about 50% since the pandemic began.
コロナになってしまって海外旅行に行けなくなってしまったから、来られたりとか、毎年ハワイに行ってるけどもハワイに行けなくなってしまっているんで、ここでハワイの体験をされたりとか、そういった形で来られる方っていうのはすごく増えております。
First Airlines started business in 2016, aiming to provide a virtual travel experience with low cost and targeting those who didn't have much time to travel. Now to the United States, where Delta Airlines has doubled its staffing to handle revamped pre-flight pit stops for deeper cleaning and wants to ensure that tray tables and restroom door handles are germ-free with a new testing process without sacrificing turnaround times, a cornerstone of profitability once passengers take to the skies.
We do every flight, every day, regardless of whether it's staying here overnight or going back out. And we start by going on board when a flight comes in, and we lower all the tray tables, we close the window blinds, open the overheads, and we do electrostatic spraying. So you can think of it as a disinfectant that has an electrical charge in it. And we go through all of those areas, and it stays on the surface for about 15 to 20 seconds.
The airline's new strategy is to take turns, the time a plane spends on the ground between flights. Depending on the aircraft size, Delta is deploying at least 8 pre-flight cabin cleaners, up from 3 to 5 previously. After cleaners spray with disinfectant and wipe down high-touch surfaces, a flight attendant and gate agent walk the cabin together to inspect. If the cabin is not up to par, they call back the cleaners.
We are choosing Delta because of we are capping our flight to 60%, and we're gonna leave the middle seat open. So that's the main reason why we have our customer coming back. That's the feedback that we get here at the gate and at the counter.
I feel quite safe at work. To begin with, I've done a COVID test once a month, and I know most of my colleagues have as well. Airplanes are cleaner than they've ever been. As someone that was a passenger before, I've definitely noticed a dramatic difference, and I'm very proud of that.
Delta's average clean time for its domestic fleet is now 20 minutes, up from 10 minutes to 15 minutes previously, depending on the aircraft size. But it aims to speed up the process to protect its turn times once schedules are heavier by adding resources which includes ATP test kits that measure the amount of bacteria on airplane and airport surfaces.
This is where we draw the curtain on the program. See you next week. I'm Bukola Joe Oketumbi.